I've been dealing with hearing loss for 15 years.
28 years.
Most of my adult life was deaf.
And it got to a point where I couldn't even tell what music was playing.
The hearing aids worked great when you first get them. When you have no sound and then you get a hearing aid, you think it's wonderful.
They had to be turned up, they had to be adjusted. I was losing more and more hearing.
I started avoiding the phone.
The phone was not my friend.
I could tell that I was not hearing the complete conversation.
And the embarrassing part is when you start responding to questions or conversations that are out of context.
You become withdrawn and people are getting angry with you, and they withdraw from you as much as you withdraw from them.
I was a wallflower.
My fallback was always my wife. Without me being able to hear her, I don't know what I would have done.
When your work and your livelihood is in jeopardy, that's your wake-up call.
That was my 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 wake-up call.
And then you learned that a cochlear implant could change that.
I said, well, I'm going for it, because we were getting ready to have more grandchildren. I want to hear these boys. I want to be able to drive them around. I want to be able to enjoy their activities.
I definitely wish I would have had my cochlear implant done, 20 years ago. I think it would have made a big difference on my life. I wish I wouldn't have been afraid.
Life is so much better after my cochlear implant. Better than I ever anticipated.
It's a new life. My hearing's back. It's regained.
Not only to participate at family gatherings and understand my grandkids, but also to again work with children and help them learn how to read. Was my life dream.
I now go to parties. I now participate in conversations. I go to the movies. I go to the theater. I go to the concerts.
I will volunteer to do stuff now where before I wouldn't.
I got my cochlear implant, and my grandchildren are back in my life.
I hugged someone and they whispered, "I love you." And I hadn't heard that since I was a kid.
If you're in this position, do it. It's your wake-up call.
You will never regret it.
I can hear. It's wonderful.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Crossan. I'm an audiologist for Cochlear, and I have the pleasure to get us started today and to welcome you. So thank you so very much for joining us. I have the pleasure of representing Jacksonville Hearing Balance Institute as well as Cochlear Americas and the partnership that we share that's going to bring you this educational event today. Along with me, I have several other professionals that you'll have the opportunity to hear from that are seated at this front table, as well as located at the back of the room towards the end of our presentation today. One of the first professionals that you'll hear from today is Dr. Elizabeth Selly, who's seated down front here. You'll hear from her in just a few minutes about how hearing works, hearing loss, and hearing loss treatment options. Next, we also have Dr. Green, who's the founder and president of Jacksonville Hearing Balance Institute. He is a cochlear implant and hearing implantable surgeon here in Jacksonville. We also have two lovely physician's assistants from Jacksonville Hearing Balance Institute here today. I do not have their photos for you, but you'll see their shining faces near the end of the presentation when we do a question and answer session. We have Judy Nelson, if you'll raise your hand, Judy, and Donna Smith. Each of you would have had the opportunity to also be welcomed by Raylan Jellis and Katie Figueroa, who are seated near the back of the room at the moment. They would have been at the welcome table. They are cochlear engagement managers and concierge, so two individuals that can be a fabulous resource to you both today and moving forward as you learn more about your hearing treatment options and how Cochlear may be a part of that. So today we're going to start by talking a little bit about how hearing works, the different types of hearing loss, and then hearing treatment options, including hearing implants, and specifically Cochlear's hearing implant systems, the Cochlear Nucleus, Cochlear Implant, the hybrid Cochlear Implant system, and the Cochlear Baha, or bone conduction hearing system. Dr. Green's going to share a little bit of information about the journey of what it's like to receive a hearing implant through his office specifically, and then talk a little bit about what to expect from that hearing implant and outcomes and performance and how that could potentially change your life. Lastly, we'll talk a little bit, we'll take the opportunity to answer some questions from the audience. So we'll have Judy and Donna come around with a microphone and allow you the opportunity to ask questions to Dr. Selly and Dr. Green at the conclusion of the presentation before we have the opportunity for you to join us at the back of the room to meet with these professionals as well as Cochlear to get your questions answered and even schedule an evaluation with Dr. Green's office. So first, I'd like to welcome Dr. Selly to the stage.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Sarah, for that introduction, and thank you again for everyone for being here today. So I think we can all agree that hearing is such an essential part of our life, of our relationships, our work. And just looking around the room, you can guess that there are many, many people suffering from hearing loss. The reason that you are here today is because either you or a family member has a hearing loss and you very well know the impact that it can have on your relationships, on your quality of life overall. And you're not alone, including everyone, or almost everyone in this room. 1 out of almost 3 people over the age of 65 have a hearing loss, which means almost 48 million adults in the United States suffer from this hearing loss. I think it's important to have an understanding of the hearing system in general, understanding how a normal or healthy hearing system functions can help us understand what happens when a hearing loss occurs and how that leads to the difficulties that it can have. So what you're about to see is just a quick video that will demonstrate how a normal or a healthy hearing system functions.
How natural hearing works. The ear consists of 3 sections: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. All 3 sections work together to deliver sound to the brain. In normal hearing, the outer ear picks up sound, which it sends in waves down the ear canal to the eardrum. These sound waves strike the eardrum and cause it to vibrate, sending the bones in the inner ear into motion. Fluid in the inner ear, or cochlea, then transfers this motion to tiny hair cells. The hair cells absorb the movement, creating electrical impulses which are sent to the brain via the hearing nerve. This translates into the sound you hear.
So our hearing system is a wonderfully made system, and it's incredibly complex. And a hearing loss will occur when there's some sort of disruption to the ear. We classify hearing loss in 2 different ways, the first being the type of hearing loss. So where that disruption occurs along the pathway is going to be the type of hearing loss that you have. The first hearing loss that I will talk about today is a sensory neural type of hearing loss. And this one occurs when the disruption lies within the organ of hearing called the cochlea. So inside of the cochlea are those hair cells that that video showed you. Those hair cells can become damaged from a variety of reasons, powerful medications, noise exposure over time, just your genetic makeup. Many things can damage these hair cells, and when these hair cells become damaged, they can no longer send that signal to your hearing nerve. And this is a permanent type of hearing loss. The second type of hearing loss is a conductive hearing loss. And like its name suggests, this occurs when there's a disruption to the conduction of sound through the ear canal or the eardrum or that middle ear space to the organ of hearing. This type of hearing loss can often be temporary and treated either through medication or through surgery. An example of a conductive hearing loss may be a complete blockage of the ear canal through a buildup of earwax. This would be an example of a temporary conductive hearing loss because once that earwax is removed, the sound can now travel down that pathway the way it's intended. There is also a mixed hearing loss, and as its name suggests, it's going to be a mix of conductive and sensory neural hearing loss. So an example of mixed hearing loss would be damage to those hair cells, but then maybe you develop an ear infection and fluid behind your eardrum. So not only is there a problem with the conducting of that sound, once it gets to the inner ear, it will encounter those damaged hair cells. The fourth type of hearing loss is what is known as single-sided deafness. This is when one ear has a total loss of hearing and the opposite ear is normal or near normal. The second way that we classify hearing loss is the degree. So if you've ever seen this picture before, it's called an audiogram, and this helps us graph or plot the type and also the degree of hearing loss. Inside that cochlea, where those hair cells are, there are actually two types, outer hair cells and inner hair cells. When those outer hair cells become damaged, we typically begin to see a mild, maybe worsening to a moderate or severe hearing loss. And from that, what someone experiences is a loss of volume. They may say, well, as long as you speak up, I can hear you and we're fine. The second type, those inner hair cells, when those begin to become damaged, that's when we start to see the hearing loss become more and more severe. So the severe to profound degree. This is when we're going to see a lack of clarity. So now, not only is everything softer, now it's distorted, garbled, and in that case, even if the volume is increased, it's still very difficult to understand. So the type and the degree of hearing loss, that combined with the amount of impact that the hearing loss is having on your life, all of this information is what your audiologists together with you will use to decide which hearing treatment is going to be the most appropriate and provide the most benefit for you. So many of you may be familiar with a hearing aid. A hearing aid is going to be a very small electronic piece that essentially collects the sound from the room around you, amplifies it to the volume that you need, and then delivers it down the ear canal to the eardrum and then to the organ of hearing. And hearing aids do this very well. They've come a long way over the last several years, and they're able to provide that volume when needed. Again, as that hearing loss becomes more and more severe, those inner hair cells are affected. Now that transmission to the nerve is affected. And no matter how beautifully programmed that hearing aid may be. The volume is there, but the clarity is not. And that's when we begin to hear things like, well, I hear you fine, that's not the problem, it's that I can't understand what you're saying. So if you're wondering to yourself, well, how do I know if it's my hearing aid or if it's the people around me? Some questions that you can ask yourself are you still having trouble understanding what people are saying with your hearing aids on a one-on-one basis, even if there's a little bit of noise in the room, maybe a lot of noise? Do you have to ask someone to repeat themselves maybe over and over to the point where you just kind of shrug and smile and nod? Do you have trouble on the telephone? Do you find yourself relying on those visual cues? Do you have to watch someone's face very carefully in order to allow your brain to help you fill in the blanks? Or do you really rely on just one ear? So if you find yourself relating to a lot of those questions, it may be a sign that the type and the degree of hearing loss that you have is just no longer able to be treated well enough with a hearing aid. And that's when we start to look at a cochlear implant. And we will talk a lot more about how it functions and how it can provide you help when a hearing aid can no longer do so. So Cochlear has a portfolio of different types of hearing implants, and we'll talk more about these. The traditional type of cochlear implant is intended for someone who has a pretty severe hearing loss, the bottom of that graph. There's also a relatively new cochlear implant called a hybrid, and that's intended for someone who actually has pretty good hearing in the low bass tones, but struggles significantly with the higher pitched treble tones. So that's going to actually use a combination of a hearing aid and a cochlear implant working together. And then there is a bone-anchored hearing aid, or a Baha. This is going to be intended for someone with one of those conductive or mixed hearing losses that can't be treated through medication or surgery. And I'm going to let Sarah take it from here to give you more information about how the cochlear implant functions.
So how many people in the room currently wear hearing aids? Say raise of hands, okay. And how many people in the room have tried hearing aids but no longer wear them? Maybe a couple, okay. So it sounds like a lot of people here have had experience treating your hearing loss at some point in your life. Now, as Elizabeth mentioned, if you find yourself still struggling despite the intervention that you've already tried, like hearing aids, the different types of implants Elizabeth just discussed may be an option for you. So I'm going to speak generally about how each of these implant systems work, and then Dr. Green is going to share a little bit more information about the journey for receiving a hearing implant and what that looks like. So of the 3 different implant types we're going to discuss today, the first is the standard cochlear implant. Okay, and Elizabeth talked about when we look at an audiogram, we're looking at the severity of hearing loss as well as the type. And for cochlear implants, we're looking at the moderate to profound range. So individuals who have a cochlear hearing loss and those sensory cells have deteriorated over time. So for this type of hearing loss, we do have an option called the cochlear implant system, and it has 2 main parts to it. Okay, there's an internal implant and an external sound processor. We're going to take a closer look at those 2 parts here in a moment.
How the Nucleus cochlear implant system works. The Nucleus cochlear implant system is designed to mimic the functions of the human ear. Sound travels to your ear and the sound processor, which sits behind the ear. The microphones on the sound processor pick up sounds, and the processor converts them into digital information. This information is transferred through the coil to the implant just under the skin. The implant sends digital sound signals down the electrode into the cochlea. The hearing nerve fibers in the cochlea pick up the signals and send them to the brain, which is translated as the sound you hear. Unlike a hearing aid that simply amplifies sound, cochlear implants send sound directly to the hearing nerve and on to the brain.
So, as that video just shared with us, a cochlear implant system is actually bypassing some of the damaged parts of the ear that have caused that hearing loss. So with that internal implant sitting behind the ear, underneath the skin, that's what's actually receiving the signal from the sound processor and transmitting it into the inner ear and to the hearing nerve. That internal implant type is something that's selected jointly as a team with your surgeon and your audiologist. And the external portion, there are also several wearing options for that as well. So I have two different sound processors that we're going to talk about next, the Nucleus 7 and the Canzo. And those are the external wearing parts. If we take a look at the Cochlear Nucleus 7, that you'll actually see a few people in the audience has currently. Would you raise your hand for me? There we go. We have one person here with us today, maybe two. Harry, 3, Judy, 4. Okay, so we have several recipients with us here today, and these available at the back of the room. We'd love for you to take a closer look at this technology. Even though I'm going to talk about what it's capable of up here, we'd love you to take the chance to actually look and see it later today. So the Nucleus 7 sound processor is the current generation and the latest sound processor from Cochlear. Cochlear has been making implants since the early 80s, and technology has come a long way since then, okay? The current generation, the Nucleus 7, is actually smartphone compatible, both iPhone and Android. You can actually use a smartphone to control the processor, to make volume adjustments, and even stream music, telephone calls, YouTube videos, and multimedia. Cochlear has a wonderful partnership with a hearing aid company called Resound. It's one of the only smart alliances. We like to call it bimodal if someone's wearing a cochlear implant in one ear and a hearing aid in the other. When we partner a hearing aid and a cochlear implant in some people, it really depends on your hearing loss, what option is going to be best for you. But the better those two technologies can go together, the better you'll hear. So we have wireless accessories that I'm going to talk a little bit more about later that are compatible with both those devices as well as smartphone technology. Here's a quick snapshot of what the Nucleus Smart app, the made for iPhone and made for Android control app, looks like. So we talked about how that technology can help you stream music, phone calls, video, FaceTime calls with loved ones, and gives you control of your hearing implant in the palm of your hand. Here's just a snapshot of what that app looks like. Okay, so you have the ability to make volume changes, to do an equipment check to the parts and pieces, to look at the battery level for your processor. All of that is housed within the app on the smartphone. I should also mention the implant systems come with a remote control, so not to worry if you're not a smartphone person, that's totally okay. This is something that's above and beyond what's typical, but certainly not something that's mandatory. So don't let that make you shy of a cochlear implant system. If you're not a smartphone user, totally okay. You can have a lot of those very same controls with a remote control separate from the app. The second sound processor that I showed you just a moment ago is called the Canzo. This sound processor is an off-the-ear option. So instead of having the computer portion of the device rest behind the ear like a hearing aid, the entire sound processor actually sits up off the ear on the side of the head. It attaches to the internal implant with a magnet to hold it in place. So that device comes in a variety of colors, just like the Nucleus 7 does, but also has some listening features and some of the wireless capabilities that the N7 does as well. So both of these sound processors have features in them to help you hear your best. Some of that has to do with the microphone placement on the device. Both of these sound processors have 2 microphones and a speech processing capability in order to help analyze the room and the environment you're in to maximize focusing in on that speech signal and what's most important. They're also compatible with wireless accessories, like I mentioned just a moment ago. The 3 wireless accessories we have available that are compatible with both of these processor types are the mini microphone, which is a remote microphone you can have a partner or another speaker wear. If there's a situation, a very crowded or noisy situation, or someone you want to hear from a distance, you can actually have them wear a microphone that wirelessly streams into the implant at a distance of up to 80 feet away. Second, we also have the phone clip that will take phone calls from the Canzo processor directly, to and from the cell phone, no matter what type of cell phone. Anything with Bluetooth in it doesn't necessarily have to be a smartphone. And third, we have the television device that actually will take audio from your home television and stream it directly to the implant wirelessly. So each of these are designed as added extras and features to the cochlear implant system to help in some of those more challenging situations. The cochlear implant, for most people, is their favorite ear after implantation and far exceeds the performance of their hearing aid ear. And in certain challenging situations, we can supplement that cochlear implant technology with these accessories to address the most difficult listening situations. So, we talked about a standard cochlear implant system. Next, we're going to cover just briefly the hybrid system. And this processor works very similar to the Nucleus 7 processor. It's got an internal implant and an external behind-the-ear sound processor. Has all the same features of made for iPhone, compatible with Android. But it's for a slightly different range of hearing. So Elizabeth mentioned already that individuals with some residual low-pitch hearing that we want to preserve and maintain that natural hearing pathway, but then supplement that natural low-pitch hearing with an implant in the high-pitch hearing. That's when we look at the hybrid cochlear implant as an option. We actually have 2 hybrid recipients in the room that are using that, actually 3 in the room that are using that technology today. Let's take a quick look at a short video that details that for us.
How the Cochlear Nucleus hybrid implant system works. The Nucleus hybrid implant system. Sound travels to your ear and the sound processor, which sits behind the ear. The microphones on the sound processor pick up the sounds you're missing and convert them into digital information. At the same time, when using hybrid hearing, the acoustic component amplifies the sounds you do hear and sends them through the ear canal in the normal pathway of hearing. The missing sound information is transferred through the coil to the Nucleus hybrid implant just under the skin. The Nucleus hybrid implant sends digital sound signals down the electrode into the cochlea in the inner ear. The hearing nerve fibers in the cochlea pick up the signals, combine them with the amplified sounds, and send them to the brain, which is translated as the sound you hear.
So we've talked about the two different cochlear implant systems, the standard cochlear implant and the hybrid. Next, we're going to talk about the bone-anchored system called the Baha, or the osseo-integrated, which just means connected to bone, or integrated with the bone hearing system next. So with the hybrid system and with the standard cochlear implant system, we're addressing sensory neural hearing loss. So cochlear loss, where those sensory cells have deteriorated over time. When we look at conductive hearing loss and mixed hearing loss, right, so hearing loss that's focused where the eardrum or the bones of hearing, the ossicles, lie, another type of implant, the bone-anchored implant, the Baha, is what we'll talk about next, may be a treatment option for that type of hearing loss.
How the cochlear Baha attract system works. The Baha attract system uses a magnetic connection to attach the sound processor to the implant. The sound processor picks up sound vibrations from the environment. The sound processor passes the sound vibrations to the attached external magnet that attracts to the internal magnet. The sound vibrations are transferred through the magnetic attachment to the small titanium implant inserted in the bone behind the ear. The sound vibrations are then sent directly through the bone to the inner ear, or cochlea, where they are converted into electrical impulses by tiny hair cells inside the cochlea. These impulses travel to the brain, allowing you to perceive sound naturally.
So we just showed you briefly the magnetic version of the Baha system called the Baha Attract. There is also another version on an abutment. So functioning on the same implant base, an abutment that comes through the skin is another way to attach that bone-anchored implant as well. With that implant, whether we're using an abutment or a small post through the skin or a magnetic system, there are actually different sound processor types. So the part that sits on the outside, similar to a cochlear implant with the Baha, we have an internal implant and then an external sound processor. That internal implant can be the magnetic system or the abutment, and then the external device, that external sound processor, comes in a variety of shapes and sizes and strengths based on someone's hearing loss and what the needs are to meet their system's needs. So pictured here, we have the 5th generation of Baha that's currently available. It has many of the same features as our cochlear implant system, including the fact that it's made for iPhone, compatible with Android, has wireless accessories to give you access to sound even in some of those more difficult situations. Next, Dr. Green is going to come share with us a little bit about the hearing journey. I know I covered a lot of information pretty quickly with the different implant types. He's going to share with you how customized the journey truly is and how there are many different types of technology that may suit your needs best, and how one of the very first steps is going to be getting an evaluation to learn a little bit more about yourself and what your options are.
Thank you very much. Really just want to kind of hit the pause button here for a minute to kind of take a minute to thank two groups of people. First, I'd like to thank Cochlear Corporation for putting this on and for partnering with us. They're an outstanding partnership, just wonderful, wonderful people. And as you can see, they have some incredible technology that changes people's lives, and they're very passionate about it. Many of them have been impacted, and it's a wonderful group to work with. So I do want to thank Cochlear Corporation for putting this on. I'd also like to thank the group of individuals that I have the privilege of working with at the Jacksonville Hearing and Balance Institute. I get to be kind of, in a sense, the face of this thing, but I really appreciate the fact that I couldn't do what I do without a very talented group of individuals that help. Dr. Sella, you had a chance to meet her. Dr. Funderburk at the back is an incredible audiologist as well, and my 2 physician assistants. And I just want to publicly thank them and let them know how much I appreciate the fine job that they do as well. So I hope you've had a chance to at least get your finger on the pulse of what's happening. Cochlear implants are exciting technology, but the excitement comes not from, in my mind, the technology, but the way that it changes people's lives. Cochlear implants have the chance to enhance the quality of life that people experience, the ability to connect with family members, with friends, and the ability to just enjoy life on a whole new level. And I think the video beautifully captured that, and I hope that you can keep that in mind as we move forward. So let me just talk for a minute about what the process is of finding out if an implant is appropriate for you, and if so, which of the implants would be appropriate. The first step is to go through a hearing evaluation. And the first step is the audiogram that Dr. Sella showed you before. That's a test to see what is the softest level that you can hear a sound in a particular tone, and also to look at how much understanding of words a person has. And those are the important things that help us to know which of the implants would be most beneficial, or if a hearing aid would be appropriate. Sometimes it's appropriate to stay with a hearing aid, and that's an important part of the decision-making process is, will this patient do better with a hearing aid, or will they do better with a cochlear implant or a bone-anchored hearing device? And the first step is an audiogram, a hearing test. In our office, that's where we start off, and then once the patient has had an audiogram, a hearing test, they would be seen by one of the medical professionals. So the next step would be to see a medical professional. And we want to see if it's something simple like wax in the ear, or possibly an infection, fluid behind the eardrum, or some other something else that might be reversible. And so you would have a history and a physical examination to look into the ear to see if there's a problem that can be remedied in some other way. And then depending upon the results of that evaluation, if it looks like a hearing implant would be appropriate, in our office, we would send you back to the audiology staff. We would go backwards to the hearing implant specialist. Dr. Sella or Dr. Funderburk would see you, and if it's an appropriate candidate for for a cochlear implant, they would do a series of tests with your hearing aids on to see if you would do better with the implant or if you would do better with the hearing aid. And so that's an important part of it. They test for individual words and sentences, both in quiet and in noise, to better understand how we can help you. If it looks like you would be a better candidate for the bone-anchored hearing device, we would have them do some testing to see if that would be appropriate for you, and to look at the different bone-anchored devices to see which one would be most appropriate for you. Then after the evaluation, you would come back to the medical professional, usually that would be to me, and we would sit down and talk about the procedure, what would be involved in doing the implant procedure, how would that go? And part of that decision making is having a physical examination by your primary care doctor to say, okay, is this person's health acceptable to move forward with an implant of some type? So we would have your primary care doctor involved in that process. We would also, for many of the different implants, do some imaging studies. We want to make sure that the cochlea is formed properly. We want to make sure that there's nothing on the inside of the head that would interfere with putting in the implant. So both a CAT scan and an MRI scan are often done as a part of that evaluation. And then after everything, if everything looks good, then we would move forward with the procedure itself. And the procedure is different depending upon which of the implants is used. Let's talk for a minute about the cochlear implant, which is what we've been kind of emphasizing today. A cochlear implant procedure is typically done as an outpatient. It takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to do the procedure. It's done under a general anesthesia, which means you're completely asleep for the procedure. There's an incision behind the ear. It kind of curves and is hidden back behind the ear. A bandage is placed on the ear afterwards, which is what patients go home with afterwards. Most people are taking it easy for a few days, for 2 or 3 days, and then after 2 or 3 days, they're back to most of their activities. Heavy physical activity, we wait about a week to get people back to heavy physical exercise and things of that nature. But most people are able to be out and about within 2 or 3 days doing a lot of their normal activities. And then, usually the people always say, well, gosh, does it hurt? And I would say, well, gosh, it really varies quite a bit. But most people, some people will take a little bit of pain medication for a day or so, and then after that they'll just use Tylenol or Advil, and we do make that available for you. And but usually the pain is minimal. The Baha procedure is a different type of procedure that involves putting the little it's called osseo-integrated, the bone implant that's placed into the ear, and there are 2 different types. The type that comes out through the skin, which is called an abutment, is a little bit of a simpler procedure. That takes about 30 minutes to do that procedure, so it's a shorter procedure. If it's the attract system, where there's the internal magnet and the external magnet, it takes a little bit longer, typically about an hour to 45 minutes to an hour to do that procedure. So depending upon the type of implant, it will determine the length of the procedure and the complexity of that procedure. As I mentioned, people are typically back to themselves easily within a week, but oftentimes even before that. And there is a bit of a delay before you start getting benefit from the implant. We want to allow time for the swelling to go down, and in the case of the bone anchor device, we want to have a chance for the bone to actually grow into that implant. So it really varies. So we have to wait a while for the swelling to go down and for the ear to be in a suitable position. So for the cochlear implant, it's typically a 3 to 4 week wait before you start hearing with the implant. So there's kind of this delay that you know is no fun, but unfortunately we have to allow that to take place. And then typically for the bone anchored devices, it's about a 6-week wait before the implant is activated. So it varies depending upon the type of implant. So after that delay comes the really fun part, and that's the part that Dr. Sella and Dr. Funderburk and our staff really, we all get excited when it's activation day, because that's the day when people really start to gain benefit from the implant. And that's where really it's, you know, I get a smile on my face, and I know Dr. Sella and others do too, because we know that that's the day that someone's going to really start to hear, sometimes for the first time. And that's where it's, you know, families are out there with the video camera going, and they're excited about it, and it's a really fun day because people start hearing, sometimes even for the first time. And so it's an exciting and a fun day. And oftentimes when the implants are activated for the first time, it takes a little bit of getting used to, because that ear oftentimes hasn't been hearing sometimes for many years. So there's a period of adjustment where the device is activated and they're starting to hear, but they're just getting used to it. They're just getting accustomed to it. And that process can take several weeks to get fully adjusted and to get maximum benefit from the implant. So sometimes we do have patients that'll get the device activated and then they just hear right away. So it's not everyone, but most people it does take a little while before they get accustomed to it. Many of you, does anyone had an artificial joint replaced, had a knee replacement or a hip replaced? You know, it used to be that years ago they would have you just lay around after you had your knee replacement. Now they get you up and start walking you around that same day, don't they? Well, hearing implants are very much the same way. We know that people that use their implants get more benefit than someone that doesn't. So just like with a knee, it used to be that people would delay using the knee. Nowadays, we want to use the knee. We want to use the implant. So it's important that once someone has the device activated, that they start having conversations with people, that they start using their device, just like the person with the artificial knee. And so we encourage people to start using their device, to start having conversations, to start watching television shows, to start having, initially we encourage people to do that with familiar voices, with family members and friends, and then as they get more adventuresome, as they get more accustomed to their device, to start having more conversations with people that they're not as familiar with. And one of the really exciting things, when I first started doing implants, and I've been doing them since, since the early 90s, has been to see the improvements in implants. When we first started doing implants, we were just so excited if someone heard a sound. We thought, isn't this a miracle? This person couldn't hear anything and now they hear a sound. Nowadays, patients routinely not only hear but understand, and they understand very, very well. Most patients are able to make use of the telephone with their implant, which is really exciting. And so the results have just gotten better and better and better and better as the years have gone by. So nowadays, the patients who get cochlear implants go from understanding only about 10% of sentences to over 72% of the words in sentences. That's a 7-fold increase in understanding of words and understanding of sentences. So it makes a huge difference in the clarity of words, and that's where people really get the most benefit, is the understanding of the person that they're having a conversation with. So, and that's very exciting for me, having been there in the early days, to see that type of an improvement. So part of that, I remember we talked back about, are you going to do better with a hearing aid than you are with a cochlear implant? That's what we're trying to see. Are you going to make that big jump up like we see with most of our patients? And one of the things that we try to counsel our patients on is what to expect with the device, because there's a lot of different factors that go into how well someone does with their implant. Just like we talked about the knee replacement, how well that knee works is going to largely depend upon how hard that person works at their rehabilitation. So part of how well people are going to do is going to depend upon how hard they work afterwards. We do know from studies that show that people get a significant boost in their quality of life with a cochlear implant. And that's one of the things that we see very, very regularly, is that people are enjoying life. They're able to get out and do things that they weren't able to do before. It opens up all kinds of different exciting opportunities. We see that people understand words better. They're able to have conversations in quiet and in noise much better than they were before they had their implant. And so that's a significant improvement. Patients are better able to hear in noisy environments, particularly with the hybrid implant. That's been one of the most exciting things, is to see how the hybrid implant really has revolutionized hearing in noise. So very exciting things. And most patients that are still in the workforce will have significant employment opportunities. And there are all kinds of studies that show that people who are hard of hearing have significantly less job opportunities than someone who has normal hearing. So it brings that person new job opportunities to their life. And then obviously all kinds of different awarenesses of sounds, sometimes not just environmental sounds, but other sounds. People will have their device activated and they'll come in and they'll say, gosh, I couldn't figure out what that sound was. And they'll say, well, we looked around and I had to get my husband to show me, and it was the ice maker. And they'd never heard the ice maker was working. And so just all kinds of sounds in the environment and awareness of sounds, the air conditioning coming on, or other sounds that people become aware of many times for the first time. So one of the things that Dr. Sella, Dr. Funderburk, and our staff do is try to set realistic expectations for you to make sure that you know what to expect with the implant. So that your expectations are met properly. So one of the things that people oftentimes, we talk about hearing for life. Cochlear implants are designed to last 100 years, the internal component. People always say, well, I have to have it replaced in a few years. Well, no, it's designed for life. One of the things that does happen, though, is that there are continued advancements in the design of the device itself. So about every 5 years, a patient would get a new processor that they wear behind their ear. And that's where a lot of the implant improvements occur as time goes by. So they get better and better. So that's kind of an enhancement, an upgrade that people typically get. And the advances in the design continue to improve over the years. Reliability has been incredibly improved over the years. It used to be that, every few years there was an issue that would come up. Now, it's very rare that there's any type of an issue that comes up with a processor or with an implant itself. And the reliability has gotten to a point where, gosh, it's 99+% of the time the implants work just perfectly well. The newer designs, the newer implants have some advanced sound processing schemes. The dual microphones that Sarah was referring to allow improvement in background noise, so that 2 microphones are picking up the sound and they're being processed by the implant. Smart Sound IQ with scan technology adjusts to the environment. It picks up the environment and adjusts the implant automatically. And that's smart technology that's built into the implant that allows a person to hear better. Data logging. So, with the implant, Dr. Sella can look back and see not only how many hours a day you were wearing your implant, but also what types of environments you were in when you were wearing your implant. She can look back and see which of the programs you were using as you were wearing your implant. And so we can use that information to better program the implant and to make it work better. And all of that technology adds to better performance as the years go by. And then, as Sarah was mentioning, the bimodal technology, where you have a hearing aid in one ear and a cochlear implant in the other ear, and the ability for the devices to work together, this smart bimodal compatibility, also improves the functionality of both devices, for that matter, so you can function better with the implants. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah, and she's going to talk with us a little bit about Cochlear. So let me turn it back over to Sarah, and thank you very much for coming today.
So I have just a few more things I'd like to mention before we give you the opportunity to ask Dr. Selly and Dr. Green some questions. One of the first things people often ask about is insurance coverage for hearing implants. We have a table at the back of the room here in the corner, I'm actually going to have Brandy raise her hand and wave at you in just a moment. If you'd like to connect with her at the end of the day today to ask more specific questions about insurance, she is your girl to check in with, okay? I will say in general that if you qualify from a hearing perspective for a hearing implant, most insurance types do cover them. Okay, both cochlear implants and bone-anchored implants. I won't go into too much detail because I do know we all have very different plans, but I will mention that does include Medicare. And the second thing that I'd like to share with you as we're coming to a close here is the wealth of resources available to you moving forward. So we have this fabulous partnership with Jacksonville Hearing and Balance Institute and the professionals within that office. But we also want you to know that Cochlear is here for you throughout this entire journey. We like to call that relationship the Cochlear family. So before, during, and after receiving a hearing implant, we recognize what a commitment that is, and we take that commitment very seriously. So as a part of the Cochlear family, you have many resources available to you online, over the phone, and even in person on a local level. I'm going to ask Raylan and Katie to wave to you at the back of the room. You would have seen them at check-in today, and they'll be available to answer your questions one-on-one at the back of the room if you'd like to after this presentation. But they're both local to the Georgia and Florida areas and work with lots of individuals who have questions about cochlear implants and what that process looks like. So next we're going to move into a question and answer session. We have two wonderful physician's assistants from Dr. Green's office that are going to walk around with microphones to give you the opportunity to ask a question if you feel it's something that other people may benefit from hearing about as well. So Dr. Selly and Dr. Green are going to come on stage to answer those questions. We will do our absolute best to answer as many as we can today. Anything that we're unable to answer now, please do feel free at the end to join us. I'm going to actually point out to you, there are different stations at the back of the room that are going to be for specific types of questions that you can join us and learn more. But we're going to float around the room, get to as many questions as we can in the next few minutes here, and then I will bring us to a close.
Thank you very much. And looks like a question up here at the front with the red scarf there. There we go.
I'm assuming you need an implant for each ear?
Yeah, the question was, do you need an implant for both ears? And the answer is sometimes. And there's different reasons for the implants in 2 ears and 1 ear. For instance, for a child that is born with no hearing at all, we would almost always do implants in both ears because they will develop speech and language better with 2 implants as opposed to 1 implant. With an adult that is born with hearing, who for one reason or another, whether it's genetics or infection or some other medication or something, for whatever reason they lose their hearing and their brain is already programmed to receive sounds, oftentimes we'll just do a single implant. And typically those individuals would wear a hearing aid in the other ear. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Typically, number one is that when you get 2 implants, you don't get double the benefit. It's not twice as good. There's a little bit of an incremental improvement, but it's not double the benefit. And there are other issues that come up too. One is Medicare. Medicare, a lot of our implants are Medicare patients, and Medicare is very vague about coverage for the second implant. They basically, quite frankly, they won't tell us if they cover it or not. And the devices are expensive, so we've taken a very cautious approach, and that's the approach that's used typically around the country for adults that get implants is typically one ear is done, and then the hearing aid is typically done in the other ear. Would you want to add anything to that, Dr.
No, I think that covered it pretty well, but the majority of our patients at JHBI have just the one implant and do very, very well, so we see a lot of benefit with just the one side.
And the other thing, too, that is important, and Sarah did a nice job of mentioning some of these connections that you can get to other sounds, the Bluetooth connections to the cochlear implant and to hearing aids and all, and that helps tremendously. Those are great, great resources. And, you know, I think I would certainly, we encourage all of our patients to take advantage of that because that can help quite a bit in noisy situations and enhance quality of life. Other questions? Yeah.
Yes, when you have to have the upgrades every 5 years, does insurance cover that, or is it a one and done type thing?
So insurance will typically cover an upgrade every 5 years. That's sort of their timeline, so that's the timeline we also follow. And it typically falls right in line with when Cochlear has developed something new and something exciting that can make a significant difference in the clarity and understanding. So we follow that every 5 years because that's when insurance will approve an upgrade. So it's ongoing as far as insurance coverage. And that also applies to any repairs that may occur out of warranty at a certain time. So overall, insurance coverage is pretty comprehensive for cochlear implants.
And then people would typically use the older processor as a backup. So that's available in case something, you know, you needed to send off your new processor for repairs or something like that. So the older version typically becomes a backup device for you. And those upgrades are a big deal. I think a lot of times people don't appreciate, but those little upgrades over the last 25 to 30 years are why the understanding is so much better. A little percentage, a few percentage points each 5 years over time adds up. So the new devices, the new upgraded processors are really a big deal and are a great source of improvement and satisfaction for our patients.
If I've been wearing hearing aids for 6 to 10 years and my hearing continues to deteriorate over time, would my otolaryngologist, whatever you call a hearing doctor, recommend that I switch, and would he or she provide them, or is this something that I would have to seek you out and ask you if your product would improve? That's the first part of my question is, assuming, however you answer that, and assuming I don't have any water or other problems, what would it cost me to get good hearing again?
So the question is, if the hearing has deteriorated over time and you wear hearing aids, would either your primary care or your otologist refer you for this type of treatment? And that would be a very good recommendation on their part. If you have told them my hearing is getting worse and worse and worse, and I have tried hearing aids, they're helping but they're not great, that would be a very good time to ask about seeing a specialist for a cochlear implant. It does take a specific type of physician to do the surgery, like Dr. Green, and then an audiologist for the programming. So the first step is to be evaluated and then to seek out that specialty in order to move forward.
Yeah, and I think the other question was how much would it cost? And typically, the good thing about cochlear implants is they're completely covered by Medicare and by most Medicaid programs. And so most of our patients end up with, you know, if they're a Medicare patient, it doesn't cost them anything, quite frankly. Even though it's an expensive device, they get complete coverage for the device, which is peculiar when you think about it because hearing aids aren't covered, but cochlear implants are, but that's just the way Medicare has decided to do things. Let's see, yeah, one at the back here, yeah.
Yes. My brother-in-law had one eardrum blown out in Vietnam, had it repaired, but is virtually deaf in one ear and is losing hearing from a lot of cannon fire in the other ear. Is he a candidate for this? Is that type of damage a candidate for this type of solution?
This is a good question, and a lot of it's going to depend upon the one ear that was blown out. Does he still have nerve function there? If he still has good nerve function in that ear, then he might be a candidate for one of the bone-anchored hearing devices. And then the question for the other ear, where there's a lot of noise-induced damage, it would depend upon the degree of the hearing loss and especially the degree of understandability of words that's still present in that ear. So it's, he may or may not. I wish I could be more specific for you.
So if the eardrum is completely basically shot, there still can be use for the implant?
Yeah, it's going to depend upon how much nerve function is there. The bone-anchored devices still use the remaining hearing nerve function. So if there's still some nerve function there, then a bone-anchored device may be an appropriate option for him.
My question is about water. Can you take a shower or swim?
Okay, good, excellent question. And why don't you take that one?
Sure. So when you take the processor off, the internal device, completely waterproof, shower, swimming is no problem. The processor itself is very water resistant. So sweating, moisture, humidity in the air, again, no big deal. The processor by itself isn't necessarily waterproof for swimming or showering, but Cochlear does offer an accessory. It's like a waterproof case that you place the processor in, place it back on your head, and in that case you are able to go swimming if you'd like to wear it in the shower or around water, completely waterproof.
Yes.
A wonderful presentation. I have a question. Do you mind in summarizing the complications rate and what could be the problems to expect?
That's a good question. Complications are unfortunately a part of any kind of surgical procedure. So, but I oftentimes tell people, I mean, you could have had a complication from driving here today. Everyone seemed to make it safely, and so you took a little bit of a risk in getting behind the wheel of the car and driving here today. And that's what it's like having a procedure done. You take you know what the risks are, you know what the benefits are, and then you make a decision. Thankfully, the risks with cochlear implant surgery are very, very, very low. There is a remote risk that a person could have an infection in the implant. Very rare that that occurs, but it can occur. There is a remote risk that a person could have changes in their equilibrium afterwards. That too is very, very rare. The way we do the procedure now, it's very rare that that would occur. There can be problems with, for instance, taste in rare instances can be affected. There can be, in rare instances, device malfunction. I mentioned that 1%. It's less than 1% of the time where the device itself could malfunction. Those would be the major. We work around the facial nerve. Very, very rarely that could be affected. Those are the big things that we would typically talk to people about.
Thank you. By using your bone implant, do you have any more problems with osteomyelitis and things like that?
No, I've never seen or heard of osteomyelitis as a result of implant surgery. That's a good question, but I've never heard that or seen that as a problem.
One more question.
Yes.
You have a nice phrase there. Why on earth did I wait so long?
Yes.
Can you say the same thing about the hearing aids?
Yes, you could, because there's some good studies that show people wait a long time to get help. And a lot of times there's a lot of denial that takes place. There's always this, gosh, I don't have a problem, it's everybody else that has the problem. They're just not speaking clearly, or they're just not speaking up, or there's a lot of denial that goes on, and that's kind of a natural tendency that a lot of us have, unfortunately.
A follow-up comment?
Yes.
A cochlear patient.
Yeah.
I have bilateral hybrid units, which one is 3 years old, the other one is 2.5 years old. It totally changed my life.
Good.
I had late hearing loss, and from the standpoint of complications, one of the things that occurred with me is that I lost my taste, but it came back in about 30 to 45 days, and it's because where you go in, you're close to the same nerve that your taste bud is located in.
Exactly, exactly.
The other thing which a lot of people are concerned about, I'm a Navy veteran, and between my Medicare and TRICARE, there was no cost to the surgery or the equipment that I got.
Excellent.
And I would recommend everyone here to look into getting cochlear implants, because it makes a drastic difference in your life.
Very good. Why don't we take maybe one more question, and then we can answer questions individually afterwards. So maybe one more question here. Yes, please, at the front.
Are there, go ahead.
If you have the procedure done, the implant, you talked about a 3-month or 3 week or 6 week time period. Would you still be able to wear a hearing aid that you already had during that time? Or would you be totally without hearing?
You would typically, you could continue to wear a hearing aid on the opposite ear during that 3-week healing period. Most of the time, you can't wear a hearing aid on the ear that had the surgery. Usually, you'd have to wait for that 3-week period of time. That's a good question. Sure. So I just want to, again, thank each of you for coming today, and we'll be at the back and available to answer more questions, and really appreciate you coming, and really appreciate Cochlear Corporation for all the fine work that they do.
On your tables, there is actually a request to make an appointment with Jacksonville Hearing and Balance Institute for an evaluation. If you're interested in receiving a call or an email to schedule that appointment, please take a moment and fill out this card and drop it off with Mallory, if you'll wave in the back, Mallory, at that last table. She's happy to get in touch with you to schedule an evaluation. The other tables we have at the back of the room here, we've already pointed out that Brandy is available to take insurance questions. But then we also have several cochlear implant recipients here who are patients of Dr. Green, Dr. Selly, and Dr. Funderburg, who have received cochlear implants and are here to share their story. So if you'd like to connect with them, they're available at the back of the room to answer questions as they've been through the experience personally. We also have Katie and Raylan available to answer general questions, questions about equipment. If you'd like to take a closer look at the implants, actually hold one, touch it, see what it looks like. There's additional brochures and information at the back of the room. And myself, Dr. Selly, Dr. Green, and Dr. Funderburg will be available to take questions one-on-one at the back as well. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon, and thank you to the JHBI staff for all you've done, as well as Cochlear and WJCT to make this possible. Thank you very much.